Hotspots of crime are a new unit of analysis, if you like, in trying to understand crime problems and do something about them. Most of the time, criminologists or crime prevention specialists have thought about doing something about the crime problem. They focus on two units. One, either the individual. Most of what we do about the crime problem, up to now at least, has been focused on individuals, how we can stop them from recidivating, but also on large macro units of geography, like communities or neighborhoods or beats or precincts. Hotspots of crime refers to something very different on a much smaller micro-geographic level. A hotspot can be a single street segment. It can be a small group of street segments, but still very much smaller in geographic terms than the traditional units of places, if you like, that have interested criminologists or others concerned about the crime problem. And the question of why they're important, one simple way of saying that is that when we've looked at the distribution of crime across geography, we found that crime is extraordinarily concentrated at small micro-geographic hotspots. For example, in Seattle, Washington, over a 14-year period, for every year, 50% of the crime is found at less than 5% of the street segments in the city. These findings have been replicated in a whole series of studies. Crime is very concentrated at place. Also in Seattle, 86 street segments out of almost 30,000 have about a third of all juvenile crime incidents. Well, this concentration of crime at these hotspots presents a great advantage. We can deal with a lot of crime by dealing with a relatively few places in a city. The question of why we should put more emphasis on crime hotspots has to do in part with the issue of concentration that I noted already. If a lot of crime is concentrated at a very small group of places, we can have a big effect on the crime problem by concentrating those places. But it's not just that crime is concentrated at a small number of places. We look at the data, we find that crime is relatively stable over time at those places. Now compare that to individual offending, where we know that people start out in their mid-teens and late teens committing crimes, then they go to relatively large rates of criminal activity in their early 20s, and then they start to age out of crime. So crime is relatively unstable across the life course for individuals. We've looked at 14 years of data in Seattle. What we found is that 1% of the street segments produce about 23% of the crime, and they stay hot throughout that period. So they're chronic hotspots. They're stable. Now, I should note as well that these hotspots have characteristics that make them hot. There are reasons why crime comes to those places. Sometimes it's because it's a place with a train stop or a bus stop or other places where people are getting on and off with lots of victims around. We found that, for example, when there are large groups of employees on a block, there tends to be more crime. Well, that also means that we have a sense of why crime is occurring there, and we could also try to develop strategies to do something about it. There's a series of studies, many of them randomized experiments, that show that if the police focus on crime hotspots, the crime will go down in those places. Now, the simplest response to that is often, well, they might go down there, but won't you just push crime around the corner? Well, interestingly enough, the evidence we have says that's not going to happen. At least you're not going to have enough crime pushed around the corner to make the crime prevention efforts carried out at those places not worthwhile. In that group of studies that we know of in which police have concentrated on crime hotspots, we found not only that the crime goes down at the hotspots, but when the crime does change in the areas immediately surrounding, it doesn't go up, it goes down. In other words, you don't have displacement of crime, you have what we call a diffusion of crime control benefits. In other words, if you crack down on hotspots, more likely than not, the areas around the hotspots will get better. Well, if that's the case, then certainly hotspots policing makes very good sense. This is a strategy that can work and can work without displacement. And that's why the National Academy of Sciences, in the report on police practices and policies, concluded that the strongest evidence we have about effective policing is about hotspots policing. Up till now, most of the approaches that we brought against hotspots have been law enforcement approaches in which the police and police strategies have predominated. But work we've been doing suggests that maybe we ought to think a bit more broadly. We've looked at the causes of criminal activity at these hotspots. We often find that there are, let's call them social causes, or at least there are causes that can be addressed not only by the police but also by other criminal justice agencies and perhaps non-criminal justice agencies. We found that social characteristics of places, poverty, elements of young people hanging out in the streets, etc., that those have a strong effect on whether a place is a crime hotspot. I think we might want to think in the long term about how we could change these small places so that the social features are less conducive to crime, including poverty, including family issues, children, etc. I would say that the importance of this and the importance of hotspots here is that for the most part, crime prevention specialists have said, we can't do something about poverty in a whole city. We can't change the nature of juvenile activities in a whole city. But you know what? If there's a relatively small group of places that are hotspots, maybe we can change those places. And maybe by changing those places, we can do something about the crime problem. And if we take those kind of approaches, by the way, we'll also do something else very important. We imprison an enormous number of people in the United States. Imprisonment comes from law enforcement. When the police are around, one of the things they might do is arrest people. They have a tendency towards law enforcement. With that in mind, to the extent that we can deal with these hotspots without law enforcement, we can get crime prevention benefits without the disabilities or the problems associated with arrest and imprisonment.